On October 16th at 7:50 a.m., right after sunrise near Ocheretyne in Donetsk, the largest column of Russian tanks and armed combat vehicles moved towards the villages that hold Ukraine's defenses near Dobropillia. Within hours, the usual reports turned into something else. Russia's biggest ground attack was wiped out. Wrecked armor lay on the roads into Shakhove. A unit from the First Azov Corps posted a video showing burning vehicles and soldiers retreating. The size of the attack and the speed of the defeat made the opening minutes feel like a turning point. The report stayed calm and direct, but every frame showed the same truth. A reinforced assault group failed to take its goals on ground where steady movement matters more than loud claims. What happened and where it matters. The engagement formed on the line of villages that run northeast of Pokrovsk, a logistics hub whose road and rail links turn any gain in this sector into leverage against Ukraine's supply routes. Ukrainian statements placed the main effort south and east of Shakhove and Volodymyrivka, with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles moving in more than one packet across open approaches that look pessimistic on the map and become funneled on the ground once the first shells fall. The Azov formation released video that showed the contact as it unfolded and used a restrained caption to describe a large mechanized push that had been repelled. Reuters verified the video's location near Malinivka and printed the brigade's claim that more than 20 armored vehicles took part and 9 were destroyed or disabled during the fight. Pravda's write-up named Shakhove and Volodymyrivka as the immediate objectives and matched the loss classes to what the footage suggested was burning on the field. None of those details is surprising if you know the terrain north and east of Pokrovsk. The villages sit on the lip of ground that Russia has tried to push westward for weeks, and the same lanes that look open from a satellite view narrow quickly once engines are loud, dust is up, and crews are forced to share the same track across soft soil. The contact today lived in those lanes, and the outcome will shape the way both staffs think about them tomorrow. The minute-by-minute sequence from contact to collapse. Before dawn, the line was quiet enough that sentries could hear gears at distance. A haze lay low in the hollows, and the ground was cool with the kind of early light that hides distance and reveals movement. In forward observation pits, the first calls were spare, dust and heat on the far approach. 2 lanes active, one heavier than the other, silhouettes tall enough to be tanks with infantry fighting vehicles in close company. Batteries that had rehearsed their pages the night before turned them back to the opening and ran through the marks under their fingers. Small reconnaissance drones held position where they could see the last crest that separates safety from exposure and marked the nose of the first packet as it took the slope. Mortar crews rolled through the last digits of range and elevation on boxes they had named in daylight and memorized in the dark. Fire control posts checked the lines that tie separate guns into one pattern and found them clean. It was not a loud minute. It was the kind of minute in which people do exactly what they have practiced because they know the next 5 will be louder than they need to be. The first shells did not fall on the lead vehicles. They fell just ahead of them. A short step the way an instructor taps a boot to show a student where the edge is. The driver saw the dust kick and the bright shiver of shrapnel on the ground, and they had to decide in a heartbeat whether to push into it or to find the margin in one side. One tank eased left to clear the pattern and ran into the corner of a disruption belt that was never meant to stop everything, only to nudge the nose and cut speed at the moment when speed is the fig leaf that lets a plan cross open ground. The column responded the way columns do when a piece is touched. It compressed. Spacing fell and then fell again. Intervals that had been marked on a briefing tent vanished in the fog that comes when vision narrows and the world turns into the meter in front of a driver's hatch. Commanders began to look left and right for lanes that had not been proven weak in the last 10 seconds and felt for them with tracers and coax fire. Dismounts started down to walk the verge of a hedgerow that looked like cover and found that the same hedgerow made a clean silhouette when a drone looks along it from above. The defenders walked a short pattern along the front of the bunching vehicles. The point was not to win the morning with a single dramatic salvo. The point was to keep the attackers in a measured space until other tools could make that space expensive. A loitering munition slid into view and corrected once, then twice, then did not need to correct again because the target had nowhere tidy to go. The first carrier took that hit and burned in a way that cameras recognize. Smoke that is gray and then black, and then the color that tells crews behind it that optics will lie for a while and that radio traffic will slow for reasons no one can fix. Mortars shifted to elevation clicks and came back down on the second lane because a powdery spray of earth gave away where a second packet had begun to cheat distance with speed. A company net that had sounded composed turned crowded and then heavy as too many voices tried to come up at once. On the defender's side, the sentences stayed short: shift one page to the right, hold until the rear elements reach the ditch, guide to the vehicle that still has momentum. These were not calls to courage. They were the checks and confirmations that keep a pattern in time when the field is trying to pull it apart. At 7 minutes, the geometry the staff officers draw on sand tables appeared on the ground. The leading packet that had slipped the first page slowed at a hedgerow that hid the start of a second disruption belt and drew brackets of artillery that clipped it away from the packet behind. The second packet, warned by the smoke and the radio traffic, tried to break contact to the left and ran across the edge of a mine line that tossed one vehicle sideways and forced the rest to anchor around the problem rather than through it. The drones above the line did not hunt for a spectacular moment. They stared at the 200 meters that mattered and waited for the handful of angles that make a point munition worth the cost. One came when a tank presented the clean cut of its deck for a breath as the driver tried to throw the hull into a gap that did not exist. The breath was enough. The munition fell. The tank jolted, and the units behind it saw the lesson before anyone had the breath left to put it into words. The distance between the first minutes and the 10th minute was short. What mattered inside that time was discipline. A formation that holds spacing under pressure can still choose. A formation that lets spacing collapse becomes a series of small crowds, and small crowds can be herded by ammunition that a defending staff can afford to spend. At 10 minutes, the fight tipped. Radios that had been crowded thinned because people on the net were no longer asking to advance. They were asking for medevac and smoke and instructions on how to pull back across ground they had just used in the other direction. A pair of rearward vehicles tried to push forward to screen a hitch and found themselves on a beaten path that had been measured 3 ways in the last 5 minutes. When they halted, the outline of the column became a map of where to walk shells and where to hold them. That is when footage, like the clip Reuters verified, begins to look the way it did, with multiple plumes in different places and isolated armored silhouettes trying to angle out of a shallow basin south of the approach to Shakhove rather than pressing forward on any clean line. The repulse did not look like a single blast that freezes the morning. It looked like small disadvantages arriving faster than officers could clear them, and at that point the defense shifted from holding to reducing what still moved. The second wave, the last 30 seconds, and the break. The supporting wave entered later than its planners intended and found a battle space that had already been set by the first failure. Delay mattered on a morning like this because every drone above the line has had time to memorize the small patch of ground that matters, and every gun that can influence that patch of ground has already walked its fire along the likely lanes. The fresh packet tried to use speed to cross the geometry that had just hurt its lead, but speed without spacing only placed more steel in the same box. 2 infantry carriers broke toward a tree gap that promised concealment from the driver's seat and delivered a pre-sighted intersection from the gunner's view. Another vehicle pushed straight through haze that looked like cover and skidded long on torn soil where smaller mines and ruts cut momentum and forced the hull to a halt at the wrong angle. The last 30 seconds inside the hull were quiet to any camera above. The turret stopped searching and the engine note carried the sound of indecision rather than command. On a flank that had waited patiently for this exact mistake, a team found the line they had rehearsed and delivered a single guided round that did not need a second shot. The idea of a wave became the reality of a screen as the second group turned its hulls to cover the retreat of the first. The slope that had been climbed with confidence minutes earlier filled up with vehicles that wanted to be elsewhere and with infantry that no longer had a landmark to walk toward. The break was not a charge. It was a slipping away before the box closed completely, and it left behind enough metal to make any tally sheet a hard read back at the staff table. What a repelled assault costs in machines and time. The first tallies were cautious, and they should be. Professional statements describe classes of loss in the first day, and independent desks print only the numbers they can verify. Reuters reported that Ukrainian forces claimed 9 armored vehicles destroyed during the contact and tied the video to locations near Malinivka, south of Shakhove. Ukreform's previous notes in the same sector recorded a failed assault 2 days earlier, in which a tank, an armored personnel carrier, and 3 other armored vehicles were destroyed, and additional equipment was damaged on the approaches to Shakhove and Volodymyrivka. Interfax's summary aligned with the picture and emphasized that Azov's public footage came from the same axis and the same villages that have pinned Russian plans all week. The numbers will shift as more imagery is cataloged and as crews account for vehicles that limped away. But what does not shift is the cost in time and order. Machines that retreat with broken tracks, rattled optics, or damaged radios still pull workshops and spares away from other tasks. Crews that dismount under pressure often leave behind tools and ancillary systems that have been taken for granted. Commanders must replace small parts of organizations that break under stress, and the minutes spent on that work are the minutes not spent translating a plan into another attempt. In a sector where one side is trying to widen a salient and the other is trying to reset the geometry every time it is tested, losing a full morning and a portion of the week matters more than any single dramatic clip ever will. The method visible here is a rhythm rather than a trick. Reconnaissance sets the table by confirming approach lines and rhythms. Because physics and soil keep preferring the same gullies, hedgerows, field edges, and shallow basins season after season, obstacles are in place to force compression in places where sappers and logistics cannot work under fire. Fires are sequenced to hold the attackers inside a box, while preserving ammunition for the handful of opportunities that truly alter the geometry. The virtue of that method is that it measures rather than gambles. If an attacking column clears the first box with spacing and calm, the second box slows it again, and the saving of point munitions for the handful of vehicles that break discipline remains intact. If the column hesitates at the first box and bunches on its own, the defense punishes the bunching and keeps the ability to shift. The public material from Azov after this contact shows the habits that make the rhythm sustainable. Drones that never stop looking at the small space that matters. Corrections that arrive in short sentences rather than in exited paragraphs. Guns that defer to each other when one page of fire is enough. Interfax and Ukrinform both described renewed attempts and abrupt failures in this axis during the week, which is exactly how a grinding offensive looks when the ground forces a column into predictable funnels under stress. The morning was not won by a single battery or by a single missile. It was won by crews who kept their hands on a plan until the plan worked and then took them off the moment it was time to save ammunition for the next hour. The wider context along the Pokrovsk approach. This action sits inside a series of hard tests on the border approach to Pokrovsk, where Russian forces have been trying to widen a salient and pressure the junctions that feed Ukrainian positions to the west. Recent roundups have described repeated efforts to convert marginal gains into a lane for heavier forces, and they have noted that these pushes often combine armor with motorcycles and infantry carriers in company and battalion formations when the ground permits. Each time the same problem returns, open ground narrows into the same approach corridors because the land favors them. These corridors are watched and rehearsed by the defense. When momentum falters under fire, the follow-on wave inherits smoke and broken ground rather than freedom of movement. The strategic significance of the morning is not that a single assault failed. It is that the village line around Shakhove and Volodymyrivka once again held when tested. And so long as it holds, the approaches to Pokrovsk remain defended in depth. Heavy logistics that a larger breakthrough would require cannot, with the confidence that a staff needs to move them for days at a time. The public statements that framed this repulse did not boast, and they did not need to. The pictures of smoke, the geolocation of frames, the naming of the same villages by multiple desks, and the consistent mapping of the fight to the same lens are enough to show how this sector will be argued over tomorrow and the day after. What to watch in the next 48 hours. The clearest signal will be how quickly the assault group's parent formation restores order. If evacuees and damaged machines clog the same roads they used to attack, reconstitution will lag and any talk of an immediate second push will fade into artillery harassment while workshops work and staffs rewrite. If the forward edge goes quiet except for drones and mortars, accept commanders to hand the problem to fires and aviation while they recover crews and gather spares. From the Ukrainian side, watch for restraint that reads as confidence rather than for chases that give back ground. Expect small improvements to observation posts where drones found value today, a careful extension of obstacle belts along the proven approach lines, and targeted fires on any assembly area that showed itself during the retreat. Publicly anticipate cautious phrasing while counts are firmed. Reuters will continue to anchor claims to verifiable imagery and quotations that can be read back. Ukrinform will carry brigade figures that match what officers in the sector are willing to put their names to, and Interfax will continue to compile the rolling feed that follows when a large push produces a loud morning without a durable gain, if another attempt arrives before repairs and reorganization are complete. You will recognize if, by hurried spacing, by smoke that hides as much from the attackers as it does from the defense, and by nets that sound busy without sounding confident. If the next attempt waits for more artillery preparation and moves slower, it will try to clear each box before crossing, and that choice will bring its own problems, because counter-battery fire prefers an enemy that announces its pace and holds on to a firing position for longer than a minute. If this made the first minutes of the battle feel immediate and showed how a large armored push can come apart under measured pressure, like the video so more viewers see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so the next verified frontline analysis lands the moment it is ready. And tell us in the comments whether you want us to follow the reconstitution of today's assault group, the drone and artillery pairing that wrote the geometry of the repulse, or the supply routes that will decide whether the next push arrives sooner or simply smaller.